What are some of the most common challenges developers face when working with React, and how can they effectively overcome them?
Um, the most common problem I see where people struggle for the first time is learning about state and props. And it's always state and props. So state can get really complex. Now, state just means that like if you think about the state of something, it means like what is it doing, right? What is the current value? And that's in programming, that's what we think. Um, that's what I think of when I hear the word state. Like, what's the current value of something? So the reason React is called React is because when state changes, React reacts and then updates the value that needs to be displayed on your web page, right? So when you get into managing state, what happens over time is as our applications increase in complexity, we have more and more state. We have more and more values that can change. And if they do change, we want to display those changed values everywhere that we need to show that value. So first, understanding state and props. Props are basically just values that we pass to a separate component that might not change. Um, and this gets a little complicated, but what I would say is state management in particular, because when something changes, where do I need to display those changes? What, and what components am I passing values down to that need to display these values? So when we get into tools like Redux or the context API, that's where it everything gets, I would say that's where we peak. That's where everything is the hardest. But once you practice a few times, it starts to make sense. It's kind of a complicated process because there's multiple moving parts. But what I have my students do is the first thing I have them do is I have them master building a counter app from scratch. So I send them a YouTube video from one of my favorite YouTubers. And I always say, practice this project until you can do this off the top of your head. Because once you do, you will understand state and props. When we move on to Redux and context, we have a couple boilerplates that I tell them to use, because the hardest part about using context API or Redux is getting it set up. It's like configuring it and getting your boilerplate, as I call it. So as well as hooks. So hooks are also a little confusing. But there's only so many things that you need to master. Okay, this might sound intimidating. So I would say number one is your state management. Two is your hooks, because that will help with what we call a re-render, because we want to minimize re-renders. And what that means is, like I said earlier, that when your state changes, React will react and then reload whatever component needs to display an updated value. That's called a re-render. Okay, we want to minimize the re-renders because it costs time and it's not efficient, right? So performance optimization, something called memoization, which is like, let's only rerun a function if an argument changed. Code splitting. So I would say practice is the most important. Like we are going to get into advanced concepts. And I always tell my students, I actually attended 2 boot camps myself. One in 2015, late 2015, and then one in 2020. And I saw I just wanted a certificate with React in 2020. I had already been using it. But what I saw is most students, and by most, I'm talking like 90%, and in the boot camps that I attended, they avoid going into these deeper tasks or concepts like Redux or context, and they think that it's going to be good enough to not master these things. And in reality, it's like if you want to give yourself the edge over the other developers that are interviewing for the same job as you, there are going to be people who, like I had one student, and he shared his interview, like his coding challenge, and he asked me what I recommended he would do, and I said, well, just do everything they ask. You already know how to do this, right? It said use Redux, use Tailwind, use Material UI. And so he did. He took the time, and it took a few hours, obviously, because that's just what you expect in this world, right? And this is for a junior level role. And they said that his project was the best that had been submitted, and they gave him an offer. And it was actually double the previous offer that he had gotten before that. So if you take your time and you master these things and you practice these things, you're going to be better than other people. Okay, so there will be challenges, but if here you're going to be able to have conversations about this. Like we can talk about everything, and I'll make sure that everybody in my class understands. It's what I do. I have open conversations about all of these things. Yeah, but just practice, okay? If you get stuck on anything, don't be afraid of it. Just practice.